They were not allowed to live peacefully like a Doukhobor, and they had no other choice. And Russia didn't want them there. They pleaded with their government to let us go to Canada because we can get a better life in Canada and we'll be peaceful out here. The Quakers of England assisted in that. The Mennonites of Canada assisted with that. Queen Victoria insisted, let the Doukhobors go to Canada. They tried to move them from area to area to put them in an area where they can't survive. Some were trekked by foot to Siberia. When they went to Siberia and were left alone, they were happy because they were allowed to live peacefully without the military on their back all the time. Russia realized that's a mistake. And then at the same time, the rest of the Doukhobors, our ancestors, went over to Kars.
My family started in Kars, Russia. It was Russia then, it's Turkey now. Anyway, that community paid to go on the Lake Huron and come to the sanctuary in Canada, in Halifax.
All aboard! Do you have your ticket? I need to see your ticket. Oh, great, perfect. Welcome aboard the SS Lake Huron. Good boy. And what's your name, first name?
Nate.
Nate. Thank you very much.
Everybody talks about the Doukhobors coming to Canada, and they talk about them coming over on a ship, but that's where it stays. Nobody talks about the actual journey of the ship.
Excuse me, sir, do you have a ticket?
Yes, Captain.
Okay.
I'll take it.
Excellent, good. You seem a little weak. Are you okay?
Just a little tired. I'm okay, Captain.
You look like you have a fever.
No, Captain.
I can't let you on
Captain,
without.
please. My family.
I'm sorry,
my
I can't.
children.
I can't
cannot
let
go
you.
back to the village. I have no place. But Charlotte, I need to go on the ship. I tried to obtain all the records from a gentleman in British Columbia that had all the records of all the ships, and one of the records had got lost, but that's okay. They're here. They made it here, and she made it here, Vanjoff. Her husband was with the military at the time. The mother made a decision she's going to go with the Doukhobors and come across to Canada and take the children across as well. Her husband decided she's not going to do that. She turned around, took the children, boarded them on the ship, and the Doukhobors helped her hide the children in wooden barrels, and they never saw their father ever after.
My great-grandfather, he came over at that time, and he was 11 years old. He came in with a family, another family, because his parents had passed. Can you imagine 11 years old, leaving another country without your parents and boarding a ship to come to a place that you're not sure what it's going to be like? I can't imagine.
But what would it have been like for him back in Russia?
Probably worse. From what history tells us, probably worse.
My grandfather, well, he was working as a stable hand for the Cossacks at the time. He was an orphaned boy. He lived in the stables, and he remembers when the Cossacks came back all bloodied, drunken, and everything. He was the one who had to clean up all the horses, the blood, the saddles, the swords, and everything. And he was all too happy to join his girlfriend, which was my grandmother, and come across.
Back in 1899, there's nothing, you know, like, and I'm going, they're way tougher than me. I couldn't last 31 minutes.
my mother's side, the old man that brought his family across was Igorov, and he lost his wife at sea.
During the time that the Doukhobors were on this ship, there were 10 deaths at that time. They would sing hymns. They would wrap the body in a canvas, lift it up, and they would put it into the sea.
Grandfather was taught how to read and write by the Cossacks. He has diary notes about that trip across the ocean. And one of the things he says, we lost life on that voyage, and we had to bury fellow Doukhobors at sea. And Doukhobors love the ground. I mean, Doukhobors are stewards of the soil minded.
So when the Doukhobors were on this ship, this Dr. Mercer came up to this father who had a sick 5-year-old boy. This little boy had leukemia. He wanted to examine the boy, and the father then said, "Please, sir, be careful with him and not to cause him any more pain, as soon he will die." That child died that night, and the Doukhobor elders wrapped that child in a canvas and put that child into the sea, and splash is how they buried their people.
But he said on top of all of that pain and anguish, Nikolai, he called me, it was the romance of it all. Going to a new land without knowing what you would see. Watching these mountainous waves, they're crashing across the ship. Watching the way our people made the captain of the Lake Huron say, "This is the cleanest ship in the world," because our Doukhobor men and women would go out there and scrub every wall, all the decks. It was a resplendent job of Doukhobor cleanliness.
Well, the people that are boarding this ship back in 1899, they were the crew. So back then, when they got on the ship, they actually were the ones that had to listen to that captain to have that voyage continue to get them to Canada. While the Doukhobors were on this ship for 31 days, they don't eat meat, so it was all just different foods that were dried foods. So you're going to taste some of the foods today that the Doukhobors had. And one of the foods that the Doukhobors did have was dried bread and black tea.
The conditions, but my grandma said they ate cabbage on the ship so they didn't get scurvy because it had vitamin C in it.
Yep.
She said they took crops of it.
They were smart. And when they were told they were coming, I guess they asked somebody and they said, "There's no rocks in Canada." And they needed rocks for something. So instead of packing all their clothes, they packed these huge rocks.
For steam baths, I'm thinking.
Yeah. And they got here, of course there's rocks, so they threw them all away. You go like, what? Welcome to Canada. You will disembark and you will be quarantined for 60 days. Welcome to your new home.
If you take my name, the Kazakovs, if you go back and name them in Russia, it would be Kazaki. And Kazaki are Cossacks. My name came from the military, and Doukhobor from the Cossacks.
They came to Halifax, and then they took the big route across the country by train.
And head, I believe, to Winnipeg. From Winnipeg, some of them made it by train as far as Yorkton, and then had to walk the rest of the way.
And they ended up in one of the 4 reserves that had been set aside. And one of those reserves was called, ultimately, Saskatchewan. Winters were severe. There was no safety net from government. There was no Salvation Army operating. So our Indigenous brothers and sisters came to the fore, and they helped our people survive some of the most difficult and anguishing winters in the history of this country.
They spent the winter in the tents on what's called the Duck Lake Plain. In the spring, our people crossed the Fort Carlton ferry, and they walked south following the river. And they came to this yard. This was all a ravine through here. Their idea was, there's a spring down here, eh? Survival, water.
My great-grandfather was Jim Fred Popoff, and my great-grandmother was Polly Posnikov. And so when he came over at 11 years old, they lived in the ground for 5 years while they were building the village across the road, Ospania. And then he purchased the land, the dugout site, when he was 16 and he married. And from then, it stayed in the family. And the thing about the site, the cave site, is most of the people that lived at that site, the 300 people, were children.
My grandma was a fastidious and independent human being. On the voyages to Canada, many of the Doukhobors contributed to what is a theocratic hereditary leadership fund. Grandma did not. She sold whatever money they brought into her petticoats, and as you know, Doukhobor women, like others at the time, wore a series of petticoats. So my grandma, Aksenia, gave money to my grandpa, Efim, and my great-grandpa, Alexei, to go and buy land outside the communitarian life, which they did, and we have continuously lived on and farmed that property for 100 years. That is one of the great prides of my life, the independence of my grandma. And so every day that I operate on that family farm and walk my dog and look at the surrounding area where all our Doukhobor families lived and the schools we attended and the kind of help we provided each other in times of need, etc., I think of Grandma and say, God bless your Grandma.
I forever am grateful to those people. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. And I'm so happy. This is a great country for us.
And sometimes people forget that part. They forget where their ancestors came from, and they forget the hardships that they had, because we live in a different world today. So if it wasn't for those people, I wouldn't be here.
If you have program ideas that you'd like to see on maxTV Local On Demand, write us at max.local@sastel.com.